In November of 1844, a junior court clerk in rural Louisiana made a mistake that history was never meant to survive. His name has been lost to time, erased as thoroughly as the documents he touched. But his action, small, ordinary, almost careless, would crack open a nightmare buried beneath respectability, law, and power. It was late afternoon when he entered the courthouse office. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that settles into old wood and dust. Judge Horace Pemberton was not present. He rarely was at that hour. Pemberton was a man who moved on his own schedule, untouchable and unquestioned. The clerk had been sent to retrieve a routine legal ledger, nothing more. Judge Pemberton's desk dominated the room, solid oak, heavy, immovable. It was said to have been custom-built, like the judge himself, imposing, polished, and locked. The top drawer resisted at first. The clerk hesitated. Everyone knew you didn't touch a judge's personal files, especially not Pemberton's. But the key had been left behind. That alone was unusual. When the drawer opened, the clerk expected court transcripts or private correspondence. Instead, he found neatly folded documents tied with faded ribbon, birth certificates. At first, the number didn't register. He unfolded one, then another, then another. 16. 16 birth certificates, dated over an 8-year span from 1836 to 1844. All handwritten, all official, all hidden. His confusion deepened as he scanned the names of the mothers: Eliza Pemberton, Margaret Pemberton, Ruth Pemberton. The judge's daughters, all unmarried. All living under the same roof at Pemberton Hall. The clerk's hands began to shake. This wasn't just scandal. This was impossible. Unmarried daughters bearing children in the home of a man who built his career preaching morality? A judge who sentenced women for far less? Then he saw the fathers section. That's when the air left the room. There were no names, only numbers. Inventory numbers. The same format used in estate records for enslaved men. At that moment, the clerk understood he had stumbled onto something that could ruin lives, starting with his own. Horace Pemberton was not just a judge, he was the judge. His words shaped verdicts, sentences, and reputations. He owned land, people, and silence. And now, hidden inside his desk, was proof of a secret so monstrous it defied the law he enforced. Outside, the courthouse bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The clerk didn't know what to do. Report it? To whom? Destroy it? And live with it forever? Say nothing? And pretend he never opened the drawer? He retied the ribbon, returned the certificates to their place, locked the desk, and walked out. But secrets like this do not stay buried. Within weeks, Judge Pemberton would be dead, officially from a sudden illness. No investigation, no questions. And the documents? They were sealed by order of the state, labeled unfit for public record. They remain sealed to this day. But the question lingers, heavier with every passing year. What happened inside Pemberton Hall between 1836 and 1844? And more importantly, who else knew and chose to stay silent? If you're ready to uncover the truth behind one of the darkest hidden scandals in American history, subscribe now, because the next only gets worse. To understand how a secret like this survived for nearly a decade, you have to understand the man who built it. Judge Horace Pemberton did not look like a monster. In public, he was everything Louisiana admired in the 19th century: measured, eloquent, and unwavering. He spoke softly, but ruled harshly, believing discipline was the backbone of civilization. Newspapers praised his integrity, politicians sought his approval, clergy quoted him from pulpits. Pemberton believed the law was not meant to be questioned, only obeyed. And no place reflected his authority more clearly than Pemberton Hall. The estate sat miles from the nearest town, surrounded by sprawling cotton fields and ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The house itself was massive, 2 stories, white columns, wide verandas. From the outside, it looked like a symbol of Southern refinement. Inside, it was something else entirely. Pemberton Hall functioned like a closed system. Few visitors were welcomed, fewer stayed long. Servants, enslaved men and women, were forbidden from speaking unless spoken to. Movements were logged, punishments were swift. Judge Pemberton called this order. His 3 daughters lived there their entire adult lives. Eliza, the eldest, had once been described as lively and curious. Margaret was quiet, observant. Ruth, the youngest, rarely spoke at all. By the mid-1830s, neighbors noticed something strange. None of them married. Suitors were turned away without explanation. Social invitations declined. Church attendance became irregular. Over time, the daughters faded from public view almost completely. When questioned, Pemberton insisted his daughters were delicate and preferred the privacy of home. In that era, no one challenged a father's authority, especially not when that father was the judge. But rumors traveled anyway. Local women whispered about pregnancies that appeared and vanished. Midwives were seen entering the estate late at night. Children were rumored to be born, but never baptized publicly. Nothing could be proven, and proof was the only thing the law recognized. Behind the walls of Pemberton Hall, power ruled absolutely. Judge Pemberton controlled every aspect of life on the estate: food, movement, labor, punishment, silence. Enslaved men were assigned numbers instead of names. They slept where they were told. They worked until they collapsed, and they had no legal personhood, which meant they had no legal voice. If one of them accused the judge of a crime, it would not be recorded. If they resisted orders, they would be beaten, sold, or killed. The daughters were no freer. Under Louisiana law at the time, unmarried women were legally dependent on their fathers. They owned nothing, they controlled nothing, and they could not bring legal accusations against the head of the household. Judge Pemberton knew this. He didn't just enforce the law, he designed his life around its loopholes. Every birth that occurred inside Pemberton Hall was managed quietly. Deliveries happened at night. No doctors from town, no witnesses who could speak freely. Infants were removed quickly, their existence erased from local memory. To the outside world, nothing seemed wrong. The judge continued sentencing men for moral crimes. He lectured about virtue. He condemned degeneracy from the bench. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, something deeply unnatural was repeating itself, year after year. By 1844, 16 children had been born, 16 crimes hidden behind respectability. And still, no one intervened. Because in a system where the law protects power instead of people, silence isn't accidental, it's enforced. In the next, we uncover the detail that transformed scandal into pure horror, the fathers' identities, and the code that exposed everything. When the court clerk first glimpsed the hidden birth certificates in Judge Pemberton's desk, he thought the horror lay in the sheer number of children. 16, born over 8 years, all of them daughters of unmarried young women living under the same roof. But the real nightmare was still concealed on the page he hadn't dared to read closely: the father's column. At first glance, the clerk expected blank lines or illegible scrawls, Perhaps the judge had chosen anonymity or pseudonyms to maintain appearances. What he found instead was far worse. Numbers. Cold, precise numbers. Numbers that matched the inventory system used for enslaved men on Pemberton Hall. Every man on the estate had a corresponding code, and those codes, written in the Fathers section of the certificates, revealed a truth so monstrous that the clerk could barely breathe. Judge Horace Pemberton had fathered no children himself, but he had engineered their conception. Using his authority, he had ordered enslaved men, people he legally owned, to father children with his own daughters. Not once, not twice, 16 times. He had done this systematically, carefully, and methodically. Each child was a product of coercion, a deliberate manipulation of power, a violation hidden behind the veneer of propriety. The daughters had no legal recourse. The men had no voice. The law, the very institution Pemberton was sworn to uphold, protected him and punished anyone who tried to defy him. Imagine the terror inside those walls, the fear, the silent complicity, the constant knowledge that one word, one misstep, could destroy a life or end a life entirely. And yet, to the outside world, everything appeared orderly. The judge maintained his social standing. Neighbors admired his piety. His daughters were still seen occasionally in the town square, prim and composed, smiles carefully practiced, faces unreadable. Even today, it's difficult to imagine the psychological weight on those young women. Eliza, Margaret, and Ruth, forced into submission by the very person who was supposed to protect them, bearing the consequences of acts committed under duress, hidden behind law books and oak doors. The clerk, realizing the magnitude of what he had discovered, froze. Any mistake, any disclosure could put his own life in jeopardy. Pemberton controlled everything: land, labor, social perception, and the law itself. And the children? They didn't survive long in public memory. Some were quietly sent away, sold or adopted into other families under different names. Others disappeared entirely. Each birth was noted only in the secret ledger, the paper trail that the judge kept locked in his desk, away from prying eyes. The horror of the numbers lay not just in what they represented, but in their implications. This was not a lapse in morality, not a moment of weakness. This was a calculated, deliberate abuse of power, a systematic violation of human life repeated again and again. For nearly a decade, Pemberton had orchestrated a nightmare inside Pemberton Hall, shielded by law, silence, and fear. And the world would never know it, at least not officially. When the clerk closed the drawer, the numbers stared back at him like a judgment. Each one was a life, a crime, a story erased from history. But secrets like these have a way of lingering. They seep into memory, into whispers among the living, and into the conscience of a society that refused to act. And even today, after nearly 180 years, the records remain sealed. Scholars have petitioned. Historians have knocked on government doors. Every time the answer is the same: the files are protected, public access denied. Why? Because even in death, Judge Horace Pemberton's legacy of control, manipulation, and horror remains too explosive for the world to handle. The truth exists, but it has been locked away as meticulously as the numbers on those birth certificates. In the next, we will explore why no one, neither town, nor family, nor court, spoke up, and how fear and law combined to allow this nightmare to continue for so many years. By 1844, the truth about Pemberton Hall was as clear as it was horrifying. But outside the estate walls, it remained invisible. Why? Because in the society that surrounded Judge Horace Pemberton, silence was not just expected, it was enforced. The law itself had been weaponized to protect the powerful. Enslaved men could not testify in court. Their words carried no weight. They were considered property, not persons. Any claim of abuse, coercion, or assault was legally meaningless. And the judge's daughters? They were under the legal authority of their father. In the eyes of the law, they could own nothing, control nothing, and most importantly, accuse no one, not even the man who controlled their lives entirely. The middle-class neighbors whispered, of course. Rumors drifted through the town like smoke from a dying fire. Some suspected the daughters were pregnant more than once, but without proof, nothing could be done. To speak too loudly risked accusation of slander or defamation, a crime that could ruin reputations or even land someone in jail. The local clergy, normally the moral compass of the parish, turned a blind eye. Pemberton was a man of influence. Challenging him could mean losing your congregation, your home, your livelihood. Power, once established, had its own immunity. And Pemberton himself was methodical in ensuring control. Deliveries were orchestrated at night. Children were quietly removed. Midwives were carefully chosen to remain loyal, or at least silent. Those who disobeyed or spoke out were threatened, fired, or sold off from the estate. Fear and loyalty intertwined in a web that trapped everyone within its threads. Even the court clerk, the man who discovered the birth certificates, knew the peril. He could have exposed the truth, but one word could destroy his life. Speaking out meant challenging a man who not only held legal authority, but also had the means to ruin anyone who defied him. Power, fear, and law had created a system where silence was not accidental, it was mandatory. And yet, within that silence, lives were destroyed. The children born in secret were scattered. Some were sold into slavery far from Pemberton Hall. Others vanished, their existence erased from memory. Their mothers, the judge's daughters, lived with the weight of their forced participation, powerless to act, powerless to protect their children. The horror was methodical, sustained, and hidden by societal structures that were supposed to prevent it. Justice, ironically, existed only on paper, where Pemberton's own reputation gleamed untouched. The chilling reality is that the law, meant to serve as a shield for the vulnerable, had become a weapon in the hands of a predator. Judge Pemberton didn't merely evade consequences, he designed a system that guaranteed his crimes would remain invisible. By the time the clerk returned the birth certificates to the locked desk, the horror had sunk in. It was not merely a scandal, it was a systemic crime, and the world had been conditioned not to see it, not to acknowledge it, and not to act. When Pemberton died suddenly in late 1844, the nightmare he orchestrated didn't end, it simply became buried. The documents were sealed, labeled private or unfit for public record. No investigation followed. No one outside the estate was allowed to peer into the horrifying truth. And so history, as it often does, turned a blind eye. The crime continued to exist only in whispers, conjectures, and the locked drawers of Pemberton Hall. It is a chilling lesson in the power of law when manipulated by those it was meant to constrain, and in the terrifying reach of fear when imposed upon a community with no means of defense. In the next, we will delve into the sealed files themselves, what they contain, why Louisiana has refused to release them for 180 years, and the secrets that may still lie hidden, waiting for justice to catch up. Nearly 2 centuries have passed since the day a junior court clerk discovered the birth certificates in Judge Horace Pemberton's desk. And yet, the story is far from over. In fact, it may be more haunting now than ever because the evidence, the ultimate proof of what happened inside Pemberton Hall, remains sealed. After Pemberton's sudden death in late 1844, the documents were locked away by state order, labeled as unfit for public record. At the time, officials claimed it was a matter of decency and public morality, but the truth is likely darker. The sealed files not only recorded the judge's abuses, but also included the names and numbers of people involved, names that could have ruined the reputations of prominent families and institutions. For decades, historians have tried to access these files. Scholars, journalists, and even distant relatives have petitioned Louisiana courts. Each request has been met with the same answer: denied. Privacy laws are cited, records are claimed lost, bureaucratic obstacles are presented, but no one has ever seen the full contents. The documents are a time capsule of horror, containing details that could finally give voice to the silenced. Personal journals, letters, and perhaps punishment logs might be included. They could reveal the methods Pemberton used to coerce his daughters and enslaved men, the names of those who silently complicit, and the ultimate fate of the 16 children. And yet, after 180 years, the state refuses to release them. Why? Some believe it is out of shame, an unwillingness to acknowledge that the legal system once protected a monster rather than its victims. Others argue it's about fear that revealing the full story could lead to lawsuits, reparations, or the public shaming of descendants who remain influential today. Whatever the reason, the truth remains locked away, and in that locked archive lies a stark reminder. History is not just what happened, it is what society chooses to remember or forget. The secrecy raises a haunting question. How many other crimes, equally horrifying, have been buried under the guise of privacy or decency? Pemberton's story is unusual only in its documentation. Countless others were never recorded at all. Yet even with the files sealed, the legacy of Pemberton Hall continues to speak. The whispers, the rumors, the fragmented evidence all point to a systematic abuse of power, hidden under the veneer of legality and respectability. It is a chilling reminder that the law, when controlled by the powerful, can be used to shield crimes instead of punishing them. Modern historians continue to debate what might be in those sealed files. Could they contain evidence of other families involved, of local officials who turned a blind eye, or perhaps proof of additional children lost to history whose lives were quietly erased? The answers may never come, and that is precisely why the story remains so compelling and so horrifying. Because even in secrecy, Judge Horace Pemberton's crimes refuse to be forgotten. The files, locked away in some state archive, are not merely paper. They are a mirror reflecting the terrifying reality of power, control, and silence. For viewers today, the story forces an uncomfortable truth. History does not belong only to the victors or the respected. Sometimes it belongs to the silenced, and uncovering it requires courage, persistence, and a refusal to accept official silence. In the next, we will examine the final chapter of this story, Pemberton's legacy, how history remembers or forgets him, and why these horrors, though buried, will not stay hidden forever. Make sure you stay tuned, because the conclusion is the hardest to hear. Judge Horace Pemberton never faced justice, not in a courtroom, not in the eyes of his contemporaries, not in the records he controlled. When he died suddenly in late 1844, the nightmare he orchestrated inside Pemberton Hall did not end. It simply went underground, sealed away in the locked files that remain hidden to this day. To the world outside, Pemberton's life looked like a success story. He was remembered as a respected legal authority, a man of intellect and order, someone who enforced the law with rigor and precision. Newspapers and official records speak of him with admiration. History, in its sanitized form, praises him as a model judge. But history, as we now know, is never neutral. What is celebrated on paper often conceals atrocities in practice. Behind the veneer of respectability, Pemberton manipulated law, fear, and power to commit crimes so monstrous that their existence could not be acknowledged, even after nearly 2 centuries. The 16 children born to his daughters remain a haunting symbol of the lives destroyed in silence. Some were sold, some vanished, others were quietly absorbed into families who may never have known their origins. Each represents a human story erased by authority, hidden by society, and protected by law. The daughters themselves, Eliza, Margaret, and Ruth, lived under the weight of a system that offered no protection, no recourse, and no relief. Their suffering was invisible to everyone outside Pemberton Hall. Even today, their voices remain unheard. Judge Horace Pemberton never faced justice, not in a courtroom, not in the eyes of his contemporaries, not in the records he controlled. When he died suddenly in late 1844, the nightmare he orchestrated inside Pemberton Hall did not end. It simply went underground, sealed away in the locked files that remain hidden to this day. To the world outside, Pemberton's life looked like a success story. He was remembered as a respected legal authority, a man of intellect and order, someone who enforced the law with rigor and precision. Newspapers and official records speak of him with admiration. History, in its sanitized form, praises him as a model judge. But history, as we now know, is never neutral. What is celebrated on paper often conceals atrocities in practice. Behind the veneer of respectability, Pemberton manipulated law, fear, and power to commit crimes so monstrous that their existence could not be acknowledged, even after nearly 2 centuries. The 16 children born to his daughters remain a haunting symbol of the lives destroyed in silence. Some were sold, some vanished, others were quietly absorbed into families who may never have known their origins. Each represents a human story erased by authority, hidden by society, and protected by law. The daughters themselves, Eliza, Margaret, and Ruth, lived under the weight of a system that offered no protection, no recourse, and no relief. Their suffering was invisible to everyone outside Pemberton Hall. Even today, their voices remain unheard.